want to thank everyone for coming today. Just wanted to formalize what's been speculated on for a few days. The acquisition of the number one pick by Philadelphia, and very excited about having the certainty of number one. Have gone through a lot of work. My team has including a lot of input from the coaches and various people in the organization, ownership, Josh Harris, David Blitzer, David Heller, many others, to conclude that this was the right move for our organization at this time. Been talking a lot about what we have in place, the assets that have been stockpiled to some degree. I felt like it was the right time to move forward and apply some of those assets to a transaction that would basically allow this type of thing to happen. And the good news is we still have a plethora of other assets that continue to be available for us and to us as we continue to look at building this team into a championship organization. Most importantly, we're taking the next step, I believe, in formulating a solid young core of players that ultimately will lead to a successful and sustainable product. And that's our goal. That's where we want to be. And with the certainty of number one, we know we control our circumstances. So with that, I'll just open it up. We've got a lot of draft-related questions, I'm sure. The draft is in a few days. This will be the last media availability until then. And happy to address any second-round thoughts, other questions about the draft itself. Obviously cannot be specific with regard to who the target may be at number one. But the fact of the matter is we feel like we've put ourselves in a good situation, and happy to answer any questions you have. Yes, Keith?
What stood out with the target that you have on number one that made you decide to move up and get him?
Well, let's just talk specifically about number one. We do quite a bit of research and analyze the game in a number of ways. You analyze player data, you analyze productivity, efficiency of players, things to that nature. But there's a history of draft picks that you can study with a deep dive and know and understand that the odds are in your favor at number one more so than at any other position in the draft, that the player chosen may end up being a franchise level player. And it's a pretty significant spread. We felt in analyzing and evaluating this draft, cross-checking all those odds, that some of the talent that's there, and it's a very deep class as everyone knows, but we felt like the move from 3 to 1 was worth the cost of a first-round pick in the future. And again, knowing that we haven't taken a step outside of the draft, we still have a pick in whichever year it conveys. We have another first-round pick. So in the next 2 years, including this draft, in the next 2 drafts, rather than 4, we will have 3 picks available to us. And that's, again, something that was factored into the thought process. We haven't taken ourselves out or removed ourselves from the draft. And then further, when you add in the protections of maintaining the number one pick with all 4 picks, it certainly made that quite appealing. And again, reserving an option to retain number one next year and also retain number one in 19 is something that we felt was very beneficial to our ultimate position.
Bryan, can you give us an idea of how long ago these trade talks started? Did this just come out of the blue, or was this something that you guys had been eyeing?
Take that. Looks like it's going to fall over. Yeah, the trade talks began. I think I've been talking to Mike Zarin about this Laker pick for, I don't know, a year and a half, it seems. Have I been here a year and a half yet? We've been talking about various things that related to the draft last year, that related to the draft this year. And once Boston got number one immediately there was a discussion. Talked about some of the interest that we had in number one. That conversation led to further dialogue, and it's been consistent since the draft lottery. It culminated a few days ago, and again, a lot of discussion, a lot of evaluation, I'm sure, on both sides. We came to a conclusion that it was the right situation and the right point in the deal progression that we would make a deal, and we did. And again, there was some traction early on, maybe more so than anything I've ever spoken to Mike about, and felt like we were in the right position to make a deal. So moved forward and closed a few days ago.
Bryan, does making this move and moving forward mean that you might be more aggressive than the other organic or sort of more aggressive way to approach things in free agency, having made this move?
It's certainly something that I think affects our situation. We feel like we've got a core of young players in place that will be significantly stronger once the decision is made on Thursday night and the draft selection is made. One thing that we are going to continue to address, and something that we did last year, we brought in some veteran presence. Jared Bayless, Gerald Henderson, Sergio Rodriguez were the three that came in and filled that to some degree. A veteran player in Ersan Ilyasova had his impact while here, a very positive impact. But we're going to continue to look to build with that core and make right decisions that don't put us in a situation that jeopardize a nice strategic path towards sustainable success. So jumping out in free agency is still something that will be contemplated really with those two ideas in mind, whether or not we go out with multi-year commitments or short-term commitments that maintain flexibility. I think ideally we would like to not only have max flexibility now, but maintain max flexibility next year when this group has a chance to grow together a little bit more and be more, perhaps, more ready to add a high-level free agent. That's not to say we're not going to explore the marketplace this year, but it sure feels right that this group, this young core that we are assembling, has a chance to grow together. And again, assuming health and assuming the development of the players as we see that happening or project it out, it feels right. So you might see us, if the opportunity presents itself to add the key piece, now you have to take advantage of those opportunities when they present themselves. If we're just not ready, so be it. We can wait as long as we maintain that flexibility, and that's going to be a key objective in this whole thing. Just even speaking to the scenario with Ben Simmons coming in, there's very few situations that I can recall in history where you are putting two #1 picks on the court at the same time for the first time. I'm excited about that, but I'm nervous about that at the same time. And I'm nervous because we've got a coaching staff that is driven to win. Young players making their debuts are not always ready to win, but we're going to wind these guys up and do our best, to make them ready. And the coaching staff is going to have their challenges again with a young core. Hopefully, it'll be made better by adding some veteran presence. Some presence not only that will be helpful on the court, but also off the court as well. Young players need to be led and led appropriately, and so we'll try to address that in free agency and potentially trades as well. But excited about it.
Bryan, you've gotten to know this fan base a little bit since you've been here, and their loyalty to your predecessor a little bit. Human nature, did that maybe make you want to do some more anxious to do something to really put your thumbprints on all this at all?
I'm unaffected by that.
Yeah.
Bryan, understanding that you either haven't made your decision or you don't want to announce it at this time, recognizing that Fulks is a guy who's going to be in the conversation of those candidates who you might choose among if you keep the What about him intrigues you, his skill set that you've seen over his college career and when you had him in here, and as a guy that, if he were in the conversation, that might intrigue you?
I'm going to stay away from individual names and individual traits of players that might be considered at number one. I will talk more broadly about the draft class itself. I feel that in the top 5 or 6, within the top 10, there's probably 5 or 6 all-stars, surefire all-stars. There may be 1 or 2 franchise-level players. And on Thursday night, hopefully, we make a decision and make an announcement that results in one of those franchise-level players being here. You did, and I appreciate it.
Bryan,
Yep.
by getting the number 1 pick and as you said, adding it to a mix with Joel and Ben, how does that change the expectations, if at all, for both this season and the immediate future, from the standpoint that it would be one thing to have gotten the number 1 pick 2 or 3 years ago when you were clearly in the midst of development and that sort of thing. It seems you're not quite there anymore now. So I guess what is the baseline and the standard by which you will judge this season, and what is a step forward, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Well, hopefully we take another positive step forward. Last year, coming in, having won 10 games the previous season, didn't really know what to expect, but I was, certainly, as everyone was, a little bit disappointed when Ben went down and, missed the entire season. And who would have thought that we would improve by 18 games, given that he sat out and Jared Bayless and other key additions sat out. The fact that we're here today is, again, somewhat surprising coming off of a 28-win season. You could make the argument that had both of those players been healthy, we would not be here talking about acquiring the number 1 pick or having number 3 in the first place. So things happen for a reason. That was not by design. It was not by plan. And we took the brunt of whatever, the circumstances were and drove right past it. And once again, I'm going to give all the credit to the players who were committed, the coaching staff who were committed, the effort they laid out every night on the court. It got us to 28 wins. A few more wins and we might be sitting at the 9, 10, 11 spot. And if we're sitting at 9, 10, 11, it would have cost a lot more to get up to number 1. So again, a lot of things are, lining up with hopefully good reason. And again, to be able to have the opportunity to select number 1, control our destiny, so to speak, and have Ben Simmons and Jared Bayless and others that will be either acquired via trade or free agency join this mix, along with that developing core that's there, the healthy Joel Embiid. There's a lot of excitement and a lot of reason to, to move forward with a much firmer idea of what we have. But again, it is somewhat circumstantial that we're here, and nobody's angry about being here.
Bryan, what does it mean? What does this move mean to the NBA, saying that the Sixers are relevant again, that now they're in the picture here because they're making a move like this?
I think we were relevant before, perhaps maybe more relevant now. I think this fan base has been already excited by what they've seen. January alone last year, 10-5, gave everybody a taste of what success feels like. It's been a while. And I think that, that momentum is still carrying forward. So the relevance is there. I sensed it and felt it, and you get that feedback from players that agents that conversations with your colleagues in the marketplace, with the other people involved, the 29 other teams. It's definitely taking stride. The question is, how much does a move from 3 to 1 propel us to that level? If you stepped inside our business office across the road, you'd probably hear a bell ringing a lot. A bell rings every time someone sells a new season ticket. I would venture to say we're going to be sold out this year, playing to full capacity every night. and it's an interesting position to be in, and I think that relevance has already been felt, but it's certainly going to take even more momentum on as we select on Thursday.
Can you offer a little insight on the process, the carve-outs and protections that eventually arose? I mean, how much of a struggle was it to get them to agree to number one overall protections, and were you adamant about that?
Well, it's never easy negotiating with Boston because they're smart guys, and I'm talking about Mike Zarin, not Danny Ainge, by the way. It's harder to negotiate with Boston for me because Danny Ainge, one of my former coaches, is on the other end of the phone. But it was as difficult a negotiation as they always are. You know, two teams have two different agendas, and you try to get to a common ground, and you get to a point where both sides feel comfortable moving forward and making a deal. But you know, with respect to the protection, it was important to us not to give up the opportunity to select number one with what would be called a high-value first-round pick, and we felt that the Laker pick was a high-value first-round pick, and that the Sacramento pick likely would be too. So to be able to carve that out, that was the most important thing to us. Trust me, those protections started out differently upon first discussion, but to end up there and feel satisfied with that carve out, we ended up where we wanted to be.
Bryan?
Yep.
Given the fact that you, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Given the fact that there are franchise players in 2018 and 2019 as well, and given the fact that you said there are 5 or 6 maybe surefire all-stars in this draft, what was it about the target that you have in mind that propelled you to take him, given the assets that you already have? What were you looking for? What kind of quality that he had that maybe none of these other franchise-type players will have?
I think whether we're selecting at number one or just staying at 3, there's been some talk about our interest in acquiring yet another pick. And I'm not going to give up those efforts because we've moved up to number 1. I always feel that future assets are just that, they're future assets. But when you can look at a group of talent in this particular draft and know that you have a comfort level with who those players are, grab them while you can, because it's a known quantity. What happens in 18 and 19, there's so many things that can happen between now and then, and I would rather try to, get this taken care of now, and we felt like there, once again, was a big enough gap between 3 and 1 that we moved forward. So that was the primary reason to do this now rather than hang on to that other asset. The other thing is we're not pledging anything that mortgages our future. We're using, to some degree, house money here. That pick was not a redundancy, but to have 2 quality firsts in 18 and 2 quality firsts in 19, there's only so many picks that can be made with the roster spots that you have, with the notion that certain players are going to be developing along a path, and you're going to have to make decisions with regard to contract extensions, rookie scale extensions. Everything's got to be staggered and managed. So everything we do not only happens in a window of today, it happens in a window of what does the next 3 to 5 years look like. And we felt that the value of adding the 1 pick now was the right thing at the expense of only losing 1 of 4 going forward. So it was, again, a value proposition that we felt was correct to make.
Bryan, you've had some experience. I guess this is now going to be the 3rd time picking number 1 in the draft. When you look at those potential options, how much do you weigh skill versus also intangibles, someone's ability to carry that mantle and that role with a team or a franchise?
I think anytime I'm making a selection, whether it's 1 or 30, you're looking for talent, you're looking for character, you're looking for fit. This game is it's so important, especially when you're building an organization and you're creating a culture, and you want that culture to be right, and you want pieces that you select and bring in, whether by trade, free agency, or draft selection. You want them to fit. There's multiple players that would have fit at number one. At 3, and there's multiple at number 1. But we feel like we're going to, continue to look to add to all those, things that are so important and evaluate the players that are there. But I've said it in this draft, you can probably address everything in one selection: fit, talent, character. There's high-level talent across, multiple picks here. So again, at number 1, you control it, and I'd rather always control that decision than sit back and wait for everything else to fall into place.
Bryan, along those lines, how different or even more challenging is the process of picking first overall now and even last year compared to when you did it in 2006? Is it harder to evaluate players because the ones coming out of college tend to be younger? Is it easier because there's more information available? How do the processes compare from 06 to 16 and 17?
It's pretty simple. Talent. The talent level of this class is far and away better than where I was sitting in 2006. That's not to say there weren't some players that have emerged as really very good NBA players, all-star level NBA players, but nowhere near comparable to what we're talking about in terms of this particular draft class. It's a much clearer picture. There was no consensus number 1 in 2006, and in this particular draft, some would argue there's no consensus number 1, but there's consensus that there's multiple players that could be number 1 because of the level of the talent. But feel really good about the decision that we've made, because it puts us in a position to grab the guy that we think is the best fit, has the most talent, and that probably brings the most to this organization as a whole.
Bryan, when you talk about fit, Brett Brown has previously said, you've previously said that the need that you have, number 1, among other things, but perhaps number 1, is perimeter shooting, spacing of the floor. Is the difference between 1 and 3 in your mind, especially for that fit, particularly intriguing or exciting for you?
There are multiple players in this, let's call it the top 5 or 6, that all have, really great skill sets. I don't think you can look at any one particular player amongst that 5 or 6 that has brilliant shooting numbers, but some better than others. And that's one thing that you can look at and study, and you can understand a little bit more. That's why the draft workouts help you understand a little bit more. You study a lot of video tape. You have a lot of live impressions. Your scouts have combed, through multiple scouting reports that they've, worked on throughout a pretty long period of time. But I would tell you that it's not everything will be addressed. I know Brett likes to check off boxes, and it's something that we all do, but we talk about pace, space, and defend. And again, Brett would say defend, pace, and space, and I'm good with that. But you want well-rounded players that fit what you're doing. And I think that there's several players in the top 5 or 6 that could have fit a certain way and helped us along. But at some point, we are going to make an announcement on Thursday night where we feel like we're going to be adding the best player and the best fit. And if he's not the best shooter, we'll work to make him the best shooter. And that's where the development phase comes in, and that's where your coaching staff is so effective. And one thing that guys do in this league is improve their shooting, whether they're 4s and 5s that develop shots later in their careers, whether it's guards that are adequate shooters but need refinement. Keep in mind, it's not a knock, but a lot of players come to the league and they're unrefined. basketball-wise. And we spend a lot of time on player development for that reason.
Bryan, assuming that the targeted player for number one is a point guard, are you still committed to Ben Simmons being your point guard?
That is I know Coach and I have probably Coach more so than I have used the terminology point guard, for Ben as it relates to Ben Simmons. I think that the way I like to characterize it, and I've always fallen back to this, is primary ball handler. Ben Simmons has incredible skill. He's got size, he's got power, and he's got great vision and feel. He's a facilitator. He's a playmaker. So I've always said, I don't care if we call him point guard, point forward. We can call him point center. I don't care. To me, he's going to be on the floor, and he's going to be using his versatility to make other players on the court better. There are, again, targets in this draft that will fit right into that because they are also facilitators. They also have good vision. They also know how to play and make others better and can find ways to score when those scoring opportunities come. And I think it's safe to say we're in a position to draft someone that's going to complement Ben's skill set, whether he's a point guard or a point forward or, something else you want to call him. But Dario Saric, to some degree, has facilitator skills. He's a facilitator. He's a playmaker. Joel Embiid is a playmaker at the 5 spot. We want players that are versatile, that have diverse skill sets, that can play multiple positions. And I think sometimes we can get a little carried away with positional names, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I always said guards, wings, and bigs. That's where my head is.
Second-round picks you have in the current state of the roster, what have you seen from the workouts with these projected second-round players, and then how do you address just having so many picks to deal with?
Roster-wise, we have quite a few players under contract. You've got the uncertainty whether or not Furkan Korkmaz from last year's draft might come over. You're talking about limited roster spots. When you include the number 1 selection, it may be 2 or 3 spots that are in question. So you look at pick number 36 and you say, is anyone on the board that could possibly crack the rotation? It's unlikely, but if that presents an opportunity to select someone that we've got some confidence in, and sometimes players do slide through that first round and you get surprised. I think Draymond Green went 37, I believe, 30, 38, 35. Thank you, Tom. We've always kind of looked at players like that have potentially jumped into a situation and been right for that particular team. If there's someone on the board that makes sense, we'll certainly make a selection in that regard. But there's so many variables here what we might be able to do with these picks. You could potentially package them and move up, to have a latter first-round pick that would, potentially be a better fit for the current roster, maybe a sure fit as opposed to someone that could be just a question mark at 36. You may sell a pick because it's a valuable asset and it just may not be right in terms of the fit for your roster at that particular moment. You may defer it for future seconds down the road, which is more value. Again, you could draft a player that is not planning on coming over from overseas, an international player that you could potentially leave over for a year or two. There's the draft and stash thought process there. A lot of versatility. There's a lot of interest in our picks. We're managing and negotiating that process now. We have been over the last several weeks, but a few suitors have made themselves very, present, and they call every day and wonder what we're going to do with the picks. And what we're doing is lining up options and alternatives for those picks and for those selections. We want to be prepared as we're on the clock. That the 2-minute mark moves fast, and we're going to have multiple decisions to make on draft night. Could happen before, but at this point, nothing has happened with regard to a commitment on a pick. But a lot of activity. You know, some bids have come in, and we're assessing and evaluating all of those alternatives.
Bryan, how involved? Hi, Bryan.
Yeah.
How involved has Brett Brown been in the process to not only make the decision to trade up to 1, but on who to select at number 1 as well?
Brett's involved in everything that we do. Management and coaching is in unison on every decision that's made with regard to this organization. Otherwise, I don't move forward with player personnel transactions. It's not to say everything's an immediate snap judgment, yes, I'm in, but that's where science gets applied. That's where the analytics staff interacts with the coaches. That's where the management team gets together, and on our weekly calls with ownership, we talk about all these concepts and ideas, and you know, we all get on the same page. So when decisions are made, management and coaching and ownership are aligned, and we make decisions and move forward.
Bryan, will the first overall pick participate in Summer League, and what went into why Ben isn't?
Summer League, there you go. It's always the idea that, yes, that player that you select will be participating in Summer League. I just don't know all the details until the selection's made and those negotiations start to happen. And it's not necessarily a negotiation, but there's just a lot of variables that have to work themselves out. But it is our intention for whoever we select at number 1 and anybody else that we select that seems to be potentially a roster acquisition, that they will play in Summer League. Ben Simmons will not play in Summer League. We feel it's not prudent at this time. He's doing really well, and everything's moving along, and we just think that at this stage it's the right decision not to have him play. So hopefully number 1 will be there. There's a timing issue. You can't sign a contract until July 1. Technically, we're going to have a camp that will start, I believe, on June 28th. That will be, you know, a group of players that will make up the majority of the Summer League candidates. And, you know, by July 3rd, when we move to Salt Lake initially and play that first game, hopefully we have the core of the team intact, and we can move forward, and hopefully number 1 will be there.
Is your overriding sort of emotion, is it one of excitement, relief, like to have this done, you know, have this deal?
It's great excitement, obviously. Got a much better idea of where we are today than just a few days ago. And again, sitting in the number 1 spot, couldn't be in a better place. So we know where we are. We've got certainty, pick certainty now. We can zero in on the fine details of that selection, and plan also. We can get a head start on planning for some of the things that follow. It can also help us with our trade thoughts and free agent thoughts moving forward. So we're already onto that, and have been for several days as this thing has been waiting for the trade call to consummate.